kind of weird.
This is where I started too early last time, so this time I'm gonna.
Okay, Randy, why don't you go ahead and start?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's book discussion. My name is Randy, and I'm part of the events team here at the University Bookstore in Seattle. Tonight, we have a panel of authors who contributed to the MIT publication Human-Centered Data Science, an Introduction. Dr. Cecilia Aragon is a University of Washington professor and director of the Human-Centered Data Science Lab. Marina Kogen is an assistant professor at the University of Utah School of Computing. Dr. Michael Muller is a staff member for the IBM Research, and Dr. Shion Guha is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. Links for Human-Centered Data Science and any other books mentioned during the chat will be listed in the chat. Please submit any questions you may have for the panelists in the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen. There will be a brief Q&A session near the end of the discussion. This talk is being recorded and can be viewed on our YouTube channel after the event. I will now turn the microphone over to Dr. Aragon. Doctor?
So thank you, Randy, and thank you everyone for coming. We're really excited to have you here, and we have an exciting discussion planned for all of you, and I hope you'll find it enjoyable. We'd also like to make sure it's interactive, so please do put questions, challenge us. This is a new field, and we are excited to hear what you have to think about this. We're here tonight to talk about human-centered data science, which is a very new interdisciplinary field that draws from human-computer interaction, social science, statistics, and the computational techniques of data science. In our book, we talk about recommended techniques, both from a technical and a social perspective, to address the bias and inequality which may sometimes result from automated collection, analysis, and processing of very large data sets. So this encompasses artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we use the umbrella term of data science to encompass all of these and to make it clear that all of these fields draw from a very large amount of data, and we are creating computational conclusions based on this data. Tonight, we're going to focus on why data is human. It's not scrubbed of human influence. It is not unbiased. What we talk about in the book is how data is touched by humans at multiple points throughout its collection. And we go into more detail on that. But what I would like to do to start here, and I see no questions so far, so I'd love to see people put in some questions. The way we're going to structure this is I'm going to give an introduction to the book, and then I'm going to ask questions of each of my co-authors, my amazing co-authors that I feel very grateful to have been able to work with. And I will say this has been a fun process to work with these deep thinkers and really good and fine human beings. It's been a joy. So, all right. So our book is designed to offer people who are, oh, Michael, do you have a question?
No, I'm sorry, I'm fumbling.
You're okay.
I apologize. My fault.
But it's good, you can yeah. So the panelists can raise their hands. I guess the audience has to put questions into the Q&A panel. All right, so the goal of writing this book, when we first started out, there has been a tremendous amount of work done both in the field of data science itself and also critiques of data science. There's been many people from the social sciences, from from sociology, from many other fields, who have pointed out some of the potentially dangerous flaws in a purely computational approach. But very often, a lot of those critiques were addressed to people in their own fields. And the data science books were addressed to people in data science. And so you have these two parallel views coming up, and people weren't reading each other's work. And so what we have tried to do in this book is make data science and the technical pieces accessible to social scientists and to beginners in the field. And we've also tried to make some of the social science critiques and the more subtle and deeper ideas from the qualitative side of the world be accessible to data scientists who've only been trained in math and computer science. And part of what we have done here is the five of us together come from different backgrounds. Some of us were trained as social scientists and then learned more about data science. And some of us were trained more as computer scientists and data scientists, and then learned more about social science. And we had a lot of discussion and arguments as we were writing the book to try to make sure that we understood what each other had to say as well. And I will say that I learned a tremendous amount during this wonderful process of writing this book, starting from when all right, I want to take a step back before I get into introducing how the five of us started writing this book. About 7 or 8 years ago at the University of Washington, I was working in the eScience Institute, and we started working on a proposal to the Moore and Sloan Foundations for a data science environment. And I brought up the idea that we needed to not just be purely technical, but we also needed to think about some of the societal impacts and what it meant to do data science for social good. And the group here in the eScience Institute was tremendous and very, very welcoming of these somewhat radical ideas at the time. And we all worked together to write a grant that encompassed both the technical side and the social science and qualitative research side, so that we could be reflective about our own practices. And this book eventually came, led from all that work we did over many years. And when this started, when our writing started, was about two and a half years ago, I remember because it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. It was in February of 2020, when we all got together in a room to work intensely on the book for 1 week. And we were all in this same room, just writing and discussing. And the very next week, the pandemic shut us all down. So we continued the next draft of the book, and writing and rewriting was done completely remotely. But as I said, it was still an amazing experience. All right, so we have all been also hosting workshops and tutorials. We've been putting these ideas into practice in our own projects and developing them in our classrooms. And we want to argue that a deep understanding of human and social contexts that shape data helps data scientists respond to ethical thinking and the choices they face in their everyday practice. We want to emphasize that human-centered approaches help data scientists develop empathy for the subject of their data, leading to greater acceptance and use of data science systems. So that's one benefit. But it's important because these decisions that data scientists make often have unintended individual and social harms. Although obviously, data scientists don't want to hurt other people. They want to build something that is better and that's improving things. At least all the ones I know do. But data science has developed this significant power over human lives. And those of us who work in data science have to think carefully about that power, its potential consequences, and our responsibilities to do something about it. And this is what we are trying to do in this book, that we want to emphasize that we simply cannot move fast and break things anymore. We cannot afford to build the technology first and then worry about the ethical and societal implications later. Instead, we need to integrate a human perspective throughout data science. So with this, I'm going to transition into asking my amazing colleagues about the work they have done. So for example, Shion Guha has been fortunate to teach he's been actively teaching many students about human-centered data science at the University of Toronto. And so I'd like to ask Shion to start out by talking with what are some of the experiences you've had during your teaching?
Thank you, Cecilia. So I'll start off by saying, to reiterate the point that Cecilia already made, that we primarily wrote this book for undergraduate and graduate data science students who are about to go into industry in a couple of years. This is an applied textbook, and this will be very useful in class. So I've had the privilege of actually applying this book in practice over the last year or so. When we first started writing this book, I had a different tenure track position in the US, but through the course of writing this book, I discovered that University of Toronto, my current employer, has actually started an undergraduate and graduate program in human-centered data science, being inspired by some of the work that we'd already done in the past. So as Cecilia pointed out, all of this stemmed from the great work that she did with the eScience Institute. And then over the past few years, we've been hosting a whole bunch of workshops. We've been talking about our research. And so we're starting to see that more and more universities and other academic institutions are starting to open up these kinds of academic programs in human-centered data science. So I took the great opportunity and immediately I was fortunate enough to be granted this academic position, and I've been teaching here in the human-centered data science program for about the past year or so. And even though our book hadn't come out, I told my students that I would love to make y'all the beta testers of this book at the introductory data science class that I teach, in order to really see if the stuff that we talked about and written about in this book, if that actually makes sense to them in practice. And so largely by teaching this same course a couple of times and kind of trying to implement this various chapters from our book, I realized that the students that we currently have in data science programs are very cognizant of these kinds of issues. When I was trained in statistics and machine learning back in the day, no one ever talked to me about algorithmic biases or ethical implications of AI. All of that came about after my student days were long over. But now I see that students who want to be practitioners, who want to go out into industry, they already come in with a pretty critical mindset. But what this book provides is this book provides a nudge or a compass, if you will, in order to kind of push these students towards thinking about, well, how do you apply this in practice? How do you try to understand whether or not the systems, models, frameworks, tools that you're building, what kinds of consequences do you have even before they get put into production? What kinds of critical understandings could you have from the system, etc.? So I found that it's been a wonderful experience in teaching these students to think about these perspectives, and a variety of chapters from the book. One of the things that we've done in the book is at the end of almost every chapter, we have additional lists of both recommended readings as well as exercises, things that kind of like thought experiments, things that people should do or think about or imagine. And so I feel like any professor, teacher, instructor, lecturer might want to kind of take heed of some of those exercises and thought experiments that we've talked about and kind of guide their students into thinking about it from a very practical lens. And so we've done that not only from a critical perspective, but we also have plenty of suggestions about the technical ways in which you could start to critique and quantitatively deconstruct data science problems so that you can understand these problems from both a social as well as a technical side. So that's been my experience in the past year or so. I think that this book will certainly provide a very practical handbook for students at that introductory course level. Am I running out of time, Cecilia?
No, we just got a question from Christine that I think you would be the perfect person to answer because you've done work in this. She says, what steps can we take to minimize the abuse of AI by our government? For example, law enforcement. And that's your area.
Yes, well, Christine, thank you for the question. It just so happens that my research program is centered around algorithms and AI in the public sector, specifically in the public sector. So I've done a lot of work with both law enforcement departments as well as child welfare. I do focus a lot on child welfare if folks are not aware. In North America, we take most of the decisions that we take about our most vulnerable children in various child welfare systems are actually through algorithms and data science models and quantitative risk assessment, so on and so forth. And we've discovered that obviously they tend to have a lot of downstream biases and very negative outcomes for children, so on and so forth. Lots of people who are better than I have talked about, criminal justice. So I always like to talk about child welfare because I think that is an issue that not too many people talk about because the effect is always extremely disproportionate on very specific populations, and we should really care about that. What can we do? I think that in order to understand what we can do, we have to understand how these decisions are made at the street level in government agencies. So I'm less concerned with grand proclamations of, here's our national AI policy. I don't think that that's a useful strategy. What I think is really useful for the public sector is looking at specific departments where you already have these kinds of instruments in play, or if they're interested in acquiring models and algorithms from various tech companies. And so you have to understand how bureaucrats make decisions at that street level, at their interactions with people. And I think that you can some very simple policy decisions, some very simple policy changes, which do not require legislative changes, but rather regulatory changes, which are much easier to do, can actually provide the best bang for our buck. So that's kind of my broader spiel, but I hope that kind of got at that problem. I've been studying the public sector for quite a while now, but that's really where I see most of our focus should be. If people are interested, I'll put the link in chat. The ACLU recently, through some of the work that me and other colleagues have done, they've recently launched a nationwide information campaign about algorithms in child welfare systems across the United States. I'll put the link in chat, but there's a lot of information that you can really see the kinds of things that they're doing. Obviously, they try to kind of probe the problems from a legislative kind of sociopolitical side. And I always think that there's things that you can do now that may not involve a lot of massive scale legislative change.
That's great. Yeah. No, thank you for that great viewpoint and also that excellent example. And thanks, Christine, for the question. So going on with this, Marina has a very interesting perspective on who this book is for and the kind of vision that we had behind it. Marina?
Thank you so much, Cecilia. So I think Shion largely brought this up, that this book was originally intended by us for data science learners, right? Data science learners at different levels, undergraduate and graduate, people who are either starting to practice data science or want to practice it in the future. And I had some experience teaching some of the aspects of this as well. And just as Shion, I can attest to the fact that the students are really motivated by this. The new generation is more aware, but also really, really motivated by these human-centered aspects, where I'm currently teaching a data wrangling class for the third time. And every time I bring up aspects of this book, I really get their attention. My students are really interested in understanding how human decisions factor into the data they work with, how that travels downstream, and so on. So that's also another aspect of this from a pedagogical perspective, that this is very engaging for data science students. But Cecilia mentioned a unique perspective, I suppose, and I guess I do have one. I have a background in both computer science and sociology, and it's been really interesting writing this book together with these wonderful co-authors, because I think collectively we also have very varied backgrounds in our team, and we've been able to do some work that maybe have been missing until then. So as both Cecilia and Shion mentioned a little bit, there's a lot of wonderful work around critique of data science. There's been amazing books that I'm sure you're all aware of, in terms of impact of artificial intelligence and other kinds of algorithms on issues of social justice, race, gender, those kind of disproportional impacts of algorithms on specific groups, and the kind of biases that are that can be introduced in these systems, especially if the data itself is collected in a way that reproduces the biases that exist in our society, right? Or in societies more generally. So there's been an incredible amount of wonderful work that critiques data science, but to some degree, all that work, or most of that work, has been really centered around addressing social science audience. So these people who were doing the critique, the work of critique, are mostly social scientists, and understandably so, they were addressing their colleagues in their work, right? Even if the books maybe are written in a friendlier tone, it was still kind of a social science critique. And we felt that to some degree, this is wonderful work, and we need to be building on it, but it needs to go further. Our work needed to go beyond critique and actually address the other audience, the data science learners, with the specific focus on helping them understand the critique, right? So translating the critique from the social science jargon and from many terms that often come with rich social science history. So being able to write about these things in accessible ways that are not necessarily putting the learners on the defensive, but actually making them interested, making them curious about understanding what these critiques are saying. Why are these people so concerned about the thing I'm learning, the thing that I've chosen as my livelihood, or my career? So writing about it from the perspective of not you're doing the wrong thing, but hey, let's think about this together, how you can do this better. Right, understanding how these things can propagate certain kinds of biases and how we can do this better. So one work of this book has been the work of translation, right? Translating the social science critique to other audiences, including the data science learners. And the other big aspect that I think is really important, and an important contribution of this book, it's gone beyond the translation, right? Beyond the critique itself, by offering concrete examples, concrete methods, concrete solutions of when you're faced with this kind of situation, with this kind of potential bias, how can you, what kind of methods you could use to reduce that? What kind of methods can you use to think through the biases that the data might have? What kind of concrete solutions might help you with the particular problems, right? So this is for me the most exciting part of this book, is this connection of the critique, which is really important, but building on the critique and going further in offering concrete steps.
That's really great. Thank you, Marina. So we have gotten a bunch of questions. So I'm going to maybe So one of the points I wanted to make is that in the book, we have about 12 case studies from practitioners where they give specific stories of examples of taking a human-centered data science approach. And I think many of the questions have come up to, well, what are the practical solutions we could do to X, Y, or Z? And so we do try to address that. But so Chirag Shah has said, to your point about not building things fast and breaking, what specific things can developers do while building AI systems that will carry human values? What training could the existing engineers and developers get, given that when they were students, they didn't get to learn these things? And I think, Michael, maybe you could answer that, or probably any of us could.
Well, when it's my turn, I'll have a rant, and you'll see the word rant on the screen, to talk about some of the very practical things that people can do. But I guess in general, I would say it's never too early to ask the ethical questions and to say, who's going to suffer if we do it this way, or who might suffer if we do it this way? I'm really repeating what Cecilia and Shion and Marina have already said. If we start off with that question and ask it repeatedly, we won't mess up as often as we do now. We'll still make mistakes, and it's an imperfect way of doing things. It's probably impossible to do it absolutely perfectly. So that's a starting point. And then there are specific areas where you can make mistakes, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Michael. So there's one more question from Marcia Biederman. Did your group study the consequences of evaluating teachers in grades K through 12 through the performance of their students on standardized tests? Several years ago in New York City, this had sometimes disastrous results, particularly because some schools and even some classrooms within schools have a disproportionately large number of students with special needs or who are English language learners. Yes, I'm very familiar with this issue. Although the measurements supposedly take account of that, in real life results, they didn't. Ah, yes, that is very typical. And some teachers who were enormously admired by children and parents ended up under attack by a newspaper as some of the so-called worst teachers in the city. So would somebody like to jump in on this? Because this is a well-known topic in our field.
I'm not going to speak to this precise example, but I just want to point out that this is a glaring example where the social context is not being accounted for, right? And we could talk about this in the book, that, you know, the human-centered data science methods are the ones that both benefit sort of from the computational power we have, but also that thoroughly and consistently take into the account the social context of a specific application or the specific question. And so this is, you know, operationalizing teacher success by the test scores of the students is only one specific way of defining that, and it's a very narrow one, right? And what are other socioeconomic factors, school funding, and all these other things? What other things are being missed when you operationalize things this narrowly? When you define your variable of interest so narrowly, right? What are you missing? I think that is a very, very important case for considering context more deeply.
Yes, that's very well said, Marina, and thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you want,
I'll
just say this quickly. Just okay. One quick comment is that a good guideline is your system must allow human intervention at many points in the system. There are so many sad stories like this where you just plug the data in and the results that come out are missing, as Marina said, important social, context, or just missing variables, or just, it was an overly simplistic model. You need to be able to allow experts, like the teachers themselves, to be able to look at this and say, this is what went wrong, and we need to introduce different perspectives here. And I think anybody who has ever been in voicemail jail knows how algorithmic approaches can go badly wrong. If you just have, it's this, or this, and there's no room for human intervention, you can go down some, at the minimum annoying, and in the worst case, very dangerous, like when you're talking about child welfare, where somebody gets cut off from their healthcare funding because they didn't report in time, but the problem was they didn't get the notice in enough time, and there was no way for them to explain to a human that was what was going on. So Michael, did you have something more to add on this?
Just a little bit. Dr. Angelica Stromeyer and I have been looking at what are called data silences. And one kind of data silence is it's in the hunt for metrics, taking the thing we can measure as the substitution for the thing we want to know about. And it's usually an incomplete way of describing it. A second kind of data silence that applies here is what you see is all there is. Since all we've got is the measurement, that must be the entire description of the world right there. And so by the time we've dug back through, how did we get to that measurement? What were the alternatives? What are we missing when we do this? Teachers are hurt, students are hurt, the society is hurt. And we have to be careful about when we substitute the metric for the actuality. Sorry, that was a sermon, but I'll give another sermon in a minute.
That's very well said. So do you want to just go on with your rant now, or there's one more question I see. Do you want me to address that?
Let's have the question. I think hearing from people is better than hearing from me.
All right, so Suma asks, thank you, Suma. Congratulations on this accomplishment, thank you. How does creative writing inform your writing about data science? So Suma knows that I also write fiction and nonfiction narrative. And to me, it informs it tremendously, because we as humans take in information through stories. And it's very, very important that even a textbook about a technical topic not be a dry recitation of facts, but be a series of interlocking stories that tell, in our case, the stories of humans and how we reacted to various injustices and negative situations. And that's what we tried to bring up throughout this book, is we tried to give our personal perspectives. We told a lot of stories, not just in the case studies, which are all stories, but also from our own experiences working in data science, dealing with some situations that we knew were not right, or some situations that went very well. And I think at least my training, and I know all of us here, everybody in this group is a good writer and has that skill to tell a story well. And not all academics have that, I have to admit. But I think that that's one thing that I feel as an academic, is really important, that when we write even an academic or technical paper, that we tell it in the form of a story. Because if something is not understandable, it really doesn't matter how brilliant the ideas are. It needs to be clear to the reader. And that's something we took very seriously throughout the writing of this book. So thank you for asking that.
Can I quickly add something? I don't necessarily have much like creative writing experience in the sense of, as Cecilia does, publishing other kinds of books, but to me, the writing process of this book was really fun because we were all working together and we were building on each other's strengths. And it was such I can't find any word other than fun. It was fun to write this together. And our other co-author, Gina, who's not here right now because she's on Greenwich time, so this would be quite late for her. Me and her worked together on a couple of chapters together, really collaborated closely. She's a sociologist by training. I have some social science training, but I haven't had to express these theories in a really long time, especially in writing. So it was really incredible working together side by side and seeing how from both of our perspectives, how we could communicate these ideas in an accessible way, right? So this is not quite about creative writing, but it's a different kind of writing technique, right? Playing to our strengths, trying to translate these ideas in a more kind of accessible, relatable way to a different audience. I learned so much from Gina's writing and from everybody's writing here. We've collaborated on each chapter in different configurations. So, you know, I think this really helped us to bring out both the narrative side of things, as Cecilia mentioned, right? Kind of the stories, but also the, you know, there are technical sides to the stories as well, right? So kind of and interweave that well. I think it takes some skills, and I think collectively we worked at that quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole hopefully is greater than the sum of each part, the parts. And Shion pointed out that, yes, we do even have a chapter in the book called Storytelling with Data, because storytelling is an important metaphor throughout. Thanks for pointing that out in the chat. All right, so thanks for these wonderful questions. I think now it's time for Michael to give his rant. So you have slides, right, Michael? So
I have slides which I'll get to, but I'm going to give up about 30 seconds of time to say, in honor of my friends, I'm talking from the traditional, unceded, and contemporary lands of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people. They are here, they continue to live, they continue to have vibrant existences. I honor their ancestors and elders, past, present, and future. Now to the rant. And this rant comes from joint work with Dr. Angelica Strohmeyer. Her name does not appear because I'm starting in the middle. We've been working on a project about forgetting in the data sciences. And so if there's remembrance of data, there's also forgettance of data. And in this part of the talk, we build what we call a forgettance stack, the way that we forget as we make our data fit for analysis. So we often start off with a measurement plan, and the measurement plan actually does some interesting work. It performs a bunch of speech acts. It says, this is data, this other stuff isn't data. And so right here, just by words alone, we define what data are. It's sort of an ontological statement. We make things into data, and throughout this little rant, you're going to see a lot of making data. After we've done that, we go out and we look for the data, and sometimes we discover it, and sometimes we capture it. Well, if we capture it, that sounds like a human action. But remember what I said a moment ago, even if we are discovering data, it's a human being who discovers it, perhaps based on the speech act in which we said what data were to begin with. So as soon as we're finding data, human beings are finding the data. Human beings are probably trying to do this with the best of intentions. Nonetheless, they're having an impact on the data. Then we clean the data, and that means we change the data. Human beings go and they say, ooh, well, this part's ugly. We'd better see if there's a transformation we can do. We'd better, oh, there's a bunch of missing values. We'd better impute some transformation of the global data into that missing value. Human beings make these decisions, and they decide, well, I will make this substitution for the missing value based upon my good common sense. I'm pretty smart. I can do that. And when we use our good common sense, our social biases creep in, whether we want them to or not. Whether our hearts are full of love for people, our social biases creep in, and they creep in all the way through the stack. Then we curate the data. We might say, well, these are outliers, and we can't have those outliers in the data set. And maybe the outliers are based on something like income. And maybe when we curate the data, we're actually dumping a class of people or an ethnic category of people or a gender identity of people. They say trans women of color never get bank loans. And I think it's because they're not in the data set, because they have been curated out. People with good intentions say, oh, well, it's a number. We talked about numbers a few minutes ago. It's a number. We have to make a cutoff on the number, and we curate out possibly people we care about, possibly people we love. But best of intentions and working faster than we should, we curate people out, and we don't actually know whom we've curated out. Then we make features. We create new data by taking typically nonlinear ratios like measures of data. And in doing so, we might say things like, well, we'd like to know what the percentage of your life is that you've been working. And so we'll take, for example, this happened in IBM, then we fixed it. We'll count the number of weeks you've been alive, and we'll divide that into the number of weeks that you've worked, which turns out to be an age-biased measure and also a gender-biased measure in the United States, where, as Jessica Larco has said, most developed countries have safety nets. The United States has women. And so women do more of the caring statistically than men do, and that kind of measure discriminates against women. It's an even more flawed measure than that, but that gives you the flavor of it. Then we create entirely new data out of, well, our good sense, but really what we're doing is we're inventing data, and we're not inventing trivial data. We're inventing the data that we're trying to predict. When we put labels onto data, often that's a human decision. Sometimes it's a crowdsourced human decision, in which case there's no accountability for the labels that we make. And we've done some studies, and we know sometimes this goes well, and sometimes it's a mess, and sometimes people are making it up as they go along and then being told by their clients to remake it according to what the client expected to see. So the most important data, the data we're trying to predict, are the data that we make up. Eventually we train the model. And by the time we train the model, we forget all the stuff below the level of training the model. You can see it fading out in the slides. We get a data set. We assume the data set is perfect because data sets always are. Oh, wait, maybe that's not true. But we assume that it's perfect, and we train the model, and the model's lovely, and we evaluate the model. And then actually, I should say, for IBM, we also test the model for bias, but not everybody does that. And then we wrap the model up into a pipeline, and some vendors, some creators of models make sure that pipeline is absolutely opaque, and you can't tell what goes on inside of it. And then we send people to prison, we break up families, we take people's children, and nobody can see what's inside the model that is doing that. This is the stuff that Shion has been studying so eloquently. Then we deploy the pipeline, and there it is, it's out in the world doing things. And we know briefly that there's a bunch of people and a bunch of diverse people who are contributing to this, but really, we might mostly try to remember them while one person is deploying the pipeline, and pretty soon we forget. And then all we've got is the pipeline, and there's no human beings left, no human beings in this picture. And yet, remember all that stuff that human beings did, that human beings had to guess at, that human beings had to apply their best, responsible, and sometimes wrong judgment, filled with social assumptions that they don't examine. And then there's the pipeline out there, and nobody can see all of those human actions in it. And so we've systematically forgotten all of the information that could bring doubt on our pipeline and on its outcomes. That's the rant. So I'm concerned that we aren't doing this as well as we could be doing, and that we can look at things like that and figure out how to do it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I actually love that rant. So thank you very much for bringing that up. And I want your slides too. Those
I
are
promise.
great.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we're getting close to the end of our allowed time. Randy, is that correct, or how are we doing? Maybe we still have a little more time for us.
You have approximately 15 minutes to continue.
Okay,
if you
great.
like.
So, okay, so does anybody have some more questions, or I'm going to seed it with a few questions that others have asked, but I'd love to get questions from the audience now if somebody wants to put one in. How about if while I come up with a question, I'm going to ask those of you in the audience to just put in any question you can think of. And please do feel free to challenge us. So in the meantime, one of the things that that has been brought up to some point is how during our collaboration, especially because we all come from very different, very different disciplinary backgrounds, sometimes we learned some new things, and there were some things that we were surprised about, or that, does anybody want to mention something where they were surprised during the collaboration, that a specific example?
I think our particular approach of trying to get a first draft of a book in 5 days should be a model for other teams, because if we, from a variety of backgrounds, although we've all known each other before, it's, we're not strangers to each other, we know we're all friends, but we've never written something of this magnitude together. If we can come together and write something in 5 days, while COVID-19 was kind of slowly spreading throughout the US just before everything shut down for the first time, I think that is something that has still shocked and surprised me to this very day. When I keep telling people that we had a first draft, we wrote, was it 70,000 words, maybe 65,000 words in 5 days. And surprisingly, because immediately after that, we all dispersed, went back to our individual places, and then the lockdown hit, and there were all kinds of pressures on us. But because we did the bulk of that work in that first place, our editing tasks were actually much easier than what I thought it would be. Everyone had always told me that, oh, first you just put down some draft, and then you'll spend 2 years editing the whole thing.
Well, we did that, Shion. I do want to emphasize that we spent 2 years editing. I mean, don't minimize the work we did afterwards. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a believer in you get the first draft down, but then you spend a lot of time writing and rewriting. And I really think a lot of the value of what we came up with was done in the rewriting. So maybe we disagree on that a little bit.
I think there's
No,
an
that's
old
fair.
joke about the 80-20 rule. The first 80% takes 80% of the time, and then the second part takes 80% of the time.
Yeah,
And-
right.
And so during those 2 years, we spent 80% of the time. But the other thing is, as Shion said, at the end of 1 week, we had 65,000 words. And there's nothing superhuman about any of us. So you can do this too.
Yes, right. So we have some great questions. So Brock asks, Michael's rant reminds me that many commercial players in machine learning just package up their pipelines and bundle them for sale without educating their customers about the pitfalls and risks they have built in. Just buy it and use it. Are these new products and their risks explored in the book? And what about developers who are just told to, quote, get on with things and make the new AI shiny thing, close quote? How can developers push back? Oh, what a wonderful question, Brock. Thank you for that. So who would like to take that one? Seems like Michael, since you work in the halls of industry, maybe you would have some unique insight in that.
I don't know if it's unique, but I'll give it a try. And how do I think we're being recorded, so I want to be careful what I say. My employer does not do everything right, but we do some things right. And so we made a test kit that's available to anybody in which you can check your pipeline for bias. You can, and then if the pipeline is open enough, well, then you can go and you can try to fix it and try it again and try it again and try to reduce the bias that you're facing. Another part of trying to work for a place that allows you to not to be embarrassed is about a year and a half ago, actually just after George Floyd was murdered, IBM took a long look at facial recognition technology and said, that's a very lucrative market and we are walking away from it because it's biased. And since then, we've made a website on racial equity in design and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not usually an IBM booster, but there are employers who try to do this. IBM has not always done it right. They try to find a good place to work as part of it,
Yeah.
but also then one of the things that led to the racial equity in design website was a group of Black women in the design organization who got permission to go and make change. And eventually they went to the head of design and they said, how far can we go before we're going to get in trouble? And he said, you make me uncomfortable. He was a white guy. You make me uncomfortable. You just push me and push me and push me. I don't think there'll be a moment when I need to make you stop. And so 5 people took their careers in their hands, absolutely took their careers in their hands, and made change and made good change. Job isn't done, clearly. So that's part of it. And the other, I think another thing is don't do it alone. If you do it alone, someone will figure out a way to pick you off. But find friends, find community, make allies, make accomplices. And then figure, borrowing from Dr. King, the moral curve of the universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. You will move toward justice if you do that.
Yes. And one of the things that I believe very strongly is that data scientists, individual developers do have power. There's the structure of, corporate structure is like any large structure, is set up almost to make you feel like you are kind of a cog in a wheel. But I think, as Michael says, you can reach out to other people, and if they can't build these products without data scientists going along with it. And if every data scientist, and you don't have to be a data scientist, if every person in the says this is not quite right, let's all get together and let's push back. And it doesn't have to be a huge effort if we all work together. And I think, given how stressful the world is, how many obligations we all have, how many things are going wrong with the world, if you think about, I'm just going to do something small. I mean, we thought about this, right? Is it right to be talking about human-centered data science, when there's war going on in the world and people are dying? And I think with our discussion, I mean, Marina brought this up as well, is that we need to do what we can, and don't give up just because you don't have enough power. Do what you can. And I think, and if your strength is in one area, you should, try to push that moral curve of the universe towards justice in your own area. I think that's really.
I just want to make a tiny addition to what Michael and Cecilia are saying. I think just a reminder that we actually talk, it's not a huge part of the book, but we actually talk about sort of organizational structure in the book a little bit, right? And the fact that people don't work in solitary jobs, people work in companies, people work in teams, and how those organizational structures, how that social context affects the data science job. And I think that's another important contribution of the book, that we're not thinking about these processes as, they don't occur in isolation, right? And we have to remember that these social pressures exist, and how do we navigate them from an organizational perspective as well.
Thank you, Marina. That's a really important point. Thanks for bringing that up. We have two more questions. So Christine asks, all this use of data continues to move forward so quickly without taking the time to ask and consider the type of questions that people are raising. How do we slow this down to incorporate your approach? That's a great question. Thanks, Christine. So if somebody wants to jump in, you can. Otherwise, I have something I'd like to say. All right. So one of the things I've learned is there is a tremendous amount of pressure in organizations to move really fast. And very often the problem with that is you end up with something that is not a good solution, and you end up with a cost that is much greater down the road. And if you're looking at it even not looking at it from an ethical point of view, if you're just looking at it from a business, standpoint, what is our bottom line? I think over and over again, there's examples where businesses made short-sighted decisions on, in algorithms, but also in other decisions where they said, we need to make money this quarter. And it ended up costing them a huge amount further down the road. There are hundreds of examples of this. If you move, it's haste makes waste, right? I mean, this is something we as a society know, is if you're rushing something out the door, you're going to get something kind of shoddy. And this goes to, everything we purchase, right? If you're going to, I don't want to I don't want to get into a rant myself, but I think that if we don't slow down, we're going to lose money. That's usually a good argument to, push back against the people who are only concerned with the bottom line. Does anyone else have something to add to that?
Well, just essentially, I guess, reiterate with just a little bit of twist that we definitely talk about this in the book as well, that essentially adding this social dimension or ethical dimension actually makes better products, right? Like it's not, these things are not mutually exclusive, they're not competing, right?
Yes.
The ethical stance is not, we might think of it as this, it's taking away resources from the data science or something, but in the end, we see these examples over and over again that incorporating that from the start, whether it requires slowing down or other things, but thinking of this from the start makes a better final product, makes for better data science, right? Like, so your product in the end, yes, it might take longer, but your product will be a better product. And so from that perspective, it's essentially the other side of what Cecilia was just saying, but I just wanted to make that very clear that those are not competing values.
Right, very, very well said. And thank you for bringing that up, Marina. We have one more question from Liz, who says, you've said your book is targeted at an academic audience studying data science. How can the lay woman use your book or research to interpret or approach data critically as presented in news? What a wonderful question, Liz. Thank you so much for that. Who would like to take a stab at that one?
I could take a crack. So yes, we did mention that the primary audience for whom we wrote the book is an academic audience studying a professional data science course. However, I think that anyone will find a lot of value from this book. This book is not a traditional introduction to data science type of textbook, right? Like we assume that, there's plenty of great resources out there which will teach you all about the fundamentals of programming and data cleaning and wrangling and modeling, so on and so forth. What this book does is it provides you with a human-centered lens. And I think that we've tried throughout the book to write it in such a language, using our stories, using our case studies, so that it's accessible to anyone. I don't think that we've particularly written the book with a lot of jargon in mind. And in fact, we've made a conscious effort to define a lot of the otherwise regular jargon or buzzwords that you might see in data science. So chapters 2 and 3 of our book kind of largely revolve around a lot of these concepts that you will find, and we define them in simple ways. And I think if you are picking up data science or programming or data analysis by yourself, and you're interested in taking a critical look at, let's say, a particular problem in society that you're interested in, I think that this book will give you that human-centered lens that you can layer on top of what you've already learned. Let's say you've taken a MOOC of Coursera or edX or equivalent. So that's how I would think about it.
That's a great answer, Shion, and I completely agree. I think we're coming to the end of our time now. And so I just wanted to thank my co-authors once again for all your wonderful work and for making time to come. I know it's very late for those of you on the East Coast. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here. And thank you for, being just a joy to work with over these years. And I want to thank the audience. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I don't know how many people realize this, but authors often have booked, I know I have as an author, have given a book talk where there's only 3 people there and nobody asked questions. And so it's wonderful. Thank you so much for engaging, for asking such interesting and intelligent questions, and for just coming here and spending this part of the evening with us. We really, really appreciate it.
Dr. Aragon and all of our panelists, thank you so much. That conversation was extraordinary. And I was an English major and I'm a non-scientist, but I just loved what you had to say. And Michael, I loved your rant. I was taking notes. And when you said common sense, means, social biases. I mean, things like that just really, really are great. So thank you all for tonight's conversation. And I also want to thank tonight's audience and anyone watching the replay on YouTube. Links for tonight's books are on our website, and we hope that you will join us again. Good night, everyone.
Bye. Thanks again.